Now, a lot of scholars divide the book of Daniel up where 10 is connected more with 11 and 12. And there are some reasons for that. But I actually believe that 9 and 10 make a very beautiful couplet that come together as two unique perspectives on the same theme. And if you weren't here with us last week, that's okay. The whole message is summed up in persevere in hope because of the gospel. That's what we spent all of our time thinking about, and how God was relating to Daniel in that way. In chapter 9, Daniel was heavily burdened in his heart. He was a much older man than we imagine him to be when he was first captured and taken to Babylon. And so he had seen many things, many terrible things. Babylon was a brutal society. And so he had seen many horrors, and he had seen his people suffer, and he had waited on the promises of God, and he continually cried out that they might be fulfilled. And then he has a vision. And in that vision, God gives him this beautiful taste of hope. He shows him the future of the kingdoms of the world and how it will all culminate in the coming of the Christ, who will atone for all sin and bring in everlasting righteousness. That the physical history of the world will come to its fruition in the person of Jesus Christ and his salvific work. And so Daniel is encouraged. It even tells us he understands the vision this angel is giving him, which is astounding given the circumstances. And yet he understands and has hope. But then we find ourselves in chapter 10. And if that's where you'll join me, we're going to do a similar thing that we did last time, to try and sort of understand what Daniel's experiencing a little bit. We're going to try and read it all, right? We're going to read it all at one go and allow ourselves to be a little taken aback by the magnitude of this chapter. I'll give you another image. I talked about zooming in and out last time, but as I was sitting on this pew, I was thinking, it's kind of like a really great painting. When you first walk up in a museum or in a room, you take in the painting at a distance, and you can tell, right, that there's something beautiful and truly great paintings. And as you get closer, your eyes are drawn into the details. And there's this beautiful method called the golden ratio that many artists use that allow your eyes to lead exactly where they want you to be into their focal point, which you won't even notice. And I believe that's part of sometimes kind of how the Bible works. If we can take it in its fullness and then allow the Spirit to guide us in to the things he wants us to see without even our conscious effort. That's sort of what we're attempting tonight. So join me in Daniel 10. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict. And he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. For the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words. And as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep, with my face to the ground. And behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, For from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. When he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and was mute. And behold, one in the likeness of the children of man touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision, pains have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man greatly loved, fear not, peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. There's a lot there, isn't there? You know, maybe we should make this 3 or 4 more sermons. I'll shorten mine a little bit, go a little more in depth. I'm just kidding. We're trying to finish in the next couple weeks. But let's go back to the beginning. In chapter 9, we ended on how Daniel understood the vision and had hope. And then we come to chapter 10, and he's mourning. He's mourning for 3 weeks. He ate no delicacies. No meat or wine entered his mouth, nor did he anoint himself at all. Why is that? What happened? Didn't he have hope? Wasn't that enough? He was pointed towards the cross of Christ. Shouldn't that have been enough for him? Well, and before we get too judgy on Daniel's ability to hope and despair, is it enough for you? Do you no longer despair because you have the cross of Christ? Do you no longer struggle under a burden because you have the cross of Christ? Maybe the answer should be, no, I don't. But I doubt anyone here would raise their hands if I asked them to. And that's because the gospel is deeper than we give it credit for. Deeper than most of us will ever access. It's transformative of not just our eternal trajectory, but of every single aspect of our lives. See, what Daniel needed was not just knowledge that there would be a cross, but that there would be a second coming. When he sees the man, right, who looks like beryl, who has fire in his eyes, it's almost universally agreed that this is Jesus. He's seeing something of the Lord, our God, Jesus Christ, in all of his glory. There's too much in common with Revelation to think otherwise. There's too much in common with Paul's vision. Did you notice how Daniel was the only one to see? And he trembled and he feared and he was blinded, and yet no one who was with him saw. Well, doesn't that sound like a story you've heard before? It's how Paul was converted. And so we can assume with great certainty that this is, in fact, the glorious Jesus Christ. But it's not how we see him in the Gospels, is it? At least not most of the time. We'll talk about that in a second. And so Daniel needed to be reminded that not only is there the cross, but there will be a time when all things will be made right and all things will be made new. It's a perspective that reaches out into eternity. That what I am experiencing now, the burdens that he had when he was seeing this vision, all will be made right. Nothing now is as it's supposed to be. But someday that will change. Because you see, the gospel is a present and future reality. When Christ is on the cross, he says, "It is finished." And he's right, of course, because he's the Son of God and because he defeated sin. And yet, here we are. Do you sin? I sin. Are you affected by sin? I am too. The world certainly is. Not all has been changed, but it will be. And that's a hope that sinks deeply into your soul if you'll allow it. To see past your present and into what will be is challenging. It's nigh on impossible for humans, but that's why we have faith. And this is why God gives these sorts of visions. To know that one day things will be different. The cross is like the climax of the story or the great crescendo in a symphony, but we're still waiting for the resolution, for all the plot to be tied up so that we can feel like the story is complete, or for all the chords in the symphony to resolve so that all the tension is disappearing. That's what we're waiting for. And God is pointing to Daniel to say that is what will come. Persevere in hope for the sake of the gospel. But the gospel is also a sacrificial and victorious reality. Why do we not ponder the second coming more as a source of our great hope? I think it's because we have a tendency to get stuck on Christ as the sacrificial lamb. And now don't hear me wrong. That's incredibly, amazingly important, and we should meditate on it day and night. We'd be better off if we did. But he's also this figure. Christ is also the figure that causes Daniel to fall on his face, to be blind, to have no strength in his limbs. This is the person who promises you victory. This is the person who promises you salvation and a changed world. Maybe it's hard to believe that a simple man from Galilee can take the whole world in his hands and crush kingdoms and establish a reign that will last forever. Maybe it's hard to believe that, but it's not so hard to believe that this man will do that. But do you see Jesus like that? Do you think about how glorious he truly is? And what's even more amazing is that he was always this glorious. We see that at the Mount of Transfiguration. Christ didn't become a new thing at the Mount of Transfiguration. His glory was revealed. Christ was God, even while a man. That's one of the foundational tenets of our faith. It's absolutely necessary to our understanding of salvation. And yet we have a tendency to forget that Christ is not just the God who performs miracles, but he's the God whose eyes are like lightning, whose voice sounds like a multitude. He's a God of power and of victory, even as the sacrificial lamb who was slain. For that is his greatest victory. And now we wait. But we wait in victory. When we sacrifice, we take part in the kind of glory that Christ has. When Christ says we are his body, that we are a new person in Christ Jesus, we're not just getting the sacrificial lamb, we're getting the Lion of Judah. But how often do we use it? How often do we meditate on it? How often do we allow it to permeate our lives? The courage, the power. My guess would be not enough. Otherwise, the lost would be streaming into our churches. Amen. Because who wouldn't want to follow a man that looks like this? A man of power and beauty. But a man of power and beauty who reaches down to touch you. That's what happened at the Transfiguration too. The disciples became blinded and afraid. They didn't know what to say or do, except Peter. And then he reaches out. And the first thing they see is Jesus' face. What does he see? one with the likeness of the Son of Man. This is the gospel we are talking about. A sacrificial victory. When we sacrifice our lives for the cause of Christ, for the sake of the gospel, we do so in victory. So is your life victorious? The gospel is also a physical and spiritual reality. You see, the second half starts to talk about kings and kingdoms and princes. And angels appear on the scene, and we have Michael, and most commentators believe that Gabriel is the one talking after about verse 15. Some believe it starts at 10. But do you really believe that the gospel is a physical and spiritual reality? Do you believe that you have been transformed physically and spiritually? Do you believe that there is a real spiritual war going on around us? That the kings and kingdoms that was talked about in the last vision are the least of our problems? That it's the powers and the principalities and the authorities which we must fight against in the power of Christ? But that same man who shines with beryl, whose hair is like flames, who speaks with the voice of the multitudes, that same man took on flesh. Because you see, when we were created, we were made body and spirit. And though we sinned, we remain body and spirit. And one day we will still be body and spirit. And so when we talk about the spiritual reality of the world, we're beginning to understand the true nature of ourselves, but also the nature of Christ. When God took on flesh, he perfected all of humanity, from the first to the last. And he won victory in this spiritual war too. Some people stumble over the idea in the second half of this chapter, right, that he had trouble with standing against the prince of Persia, so he needed Michael to help. Well, don't you struggle against things? Yeah, that's right. Honesty. Of course you do. Well, God's won the victory. Why do you struggle? Well, because God has plans for your struggle. God intends to redeem your struggle, to transform your struggle for the sake of the gospel. Now, what I mean when I say, have you been transformed as a physical and spiritual reality? Don't mishear me. Our bodies are broken, right? They're tarnished by sin, and we won't get new bodies until we're raised in the resurrection that is to come. But I guess what I really mean is we have to understand that Jesus Christ saves us completely in all that it means to be human. As I said, we were once body and spirit, we are body and spirit, we will be body and spirit, and that's why Jesus took on flesh, so that we could be perfected for all time and into the future. Christ has redeemed all of you. There is nothing left which is untouched by Christ in you. Everything it means to be human is completed and perfected in the person of Jesus Christ, both as the Lamb and the conqueror. And it's beautiful how this story sort of winds up. We talked similarly in the last chapter about how there are all these grand visions, and yet at the same time, God gave a personal touch to Daniel. He gave him this perfectly tailored response to his prayers as he cried out. And so it happens here. O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you. And later, O man, greatly loved, fear not. Peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. All this depth that the gospel has, all of these sort of paradoxical realities that exist within the gospel are challenging. But it says Daniel understood. Do we? We can. Are we seeking through the Spirit of God to understand the true depth of the gospel? Or have you moved on from it, trying to seek loftier and more interesting theologies, richer and deeper commentaries on the books of the Bible? All of that's well and good. Lord knows I've spent a lot of time doing it. But have you spent that much time and effort understanding the real depths of the thing which brought you to Jesus in the first place? The simple, beautiful message of the gospel. That you are a sinner who has been saved by grace through the blood of Jesus Christ. That message reflects this entire sermon. Everything I've been talking about, all the paradoxes, all the realities are summed up in that one phrase. It's why the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. It carries weight beyond which we can know. But do we live in it? Do you understand the gospel? You believe it, but do you understand it? Do you want to? It's a very important question. Do you want to? Because the more you understand the gospel, the more challenging it becomes. The simplicity is always beautiful, but when you get into these details, you realize that it's asking more of you and more of you. And the bar is higher and higher of what you can be because you have everything that Jesus Christ is. You have the sacrificial lamb. You have the conqueror. You have the message of God right here. So do you want to understand? And I'll leave you with a more annoying question. To what degree do you want to understand? Do you want to understand this much? Do you want to go this deep? Do you, maybe a little over here? Are you going to feel better about yourself if you know this much? If you get this deep? Are you going to feel better if you know as deep as Pastor Dan knows or as deep as whatever pastor you want to choose? Is that when you'll be satisfied? Or do you want it all? And maybe you'll only get this deep. Ankle. But what do you desire from God? You have not because you ask not. So what are you going to ask from the Lord today?